Good afternoon, good evening, good night, and welcome to all of you wonderful folk who are tuning in to this Branding for Breweries. I am Tim, the Brand Weaver, and I am here today, as I am every week, to bring you the wisest minds in the beer industry to help your brewery thrive, survive, and do incredible things, whilst alongside making that wonderful liquid that you all do. Now, before I welcome my guest today to the stage, I need to give a massive shout out because I've gone and got myself a sponsor. I feel so special. I feel so loved. But a big shout out to the Keg Warehouse, the new name in kegs, providing premium steels and bag in keg options. So thank you very much, team, for sponsoring the show. And if you want to check them out, find them online. Now, moving on to the wonderful guest that we have lined up for you today. This is Laura from the Hop Tattoo Consulting. Now, Laura is a member of CAMRA. She's on the board of Women on Tap, and she's an expert in staff experience and inclusive beer spaces. And today we will be talking about what we call the Taproom Advantage, why more and more people are choosing your tap rooms over the traditional pub, and what we can learn from that and what we can take from that. So without further ado, everyone, welcome to the stage, Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Hello. How are you, bud?
I'm good.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Cannot wait to get stuck in. Obviously, I saw you on the panel at BeerX a couple of months ago, and I was like, Laura knows her stuff. I need to be chatting more to Laura. And hence, here we are today. But I suppose for those people who are not as lucky as I am, do not know who you are, have not seen you speak, maybe you could give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself, and then we'll dive into our topic of today.
Yeah, so I found myself here after kind of quite a while in the public sector, so like civil service in the NHS, where it was always very people and how they interacted with their workplace. But I could never quite get out of my itch in my brain of having been a member of bar staff in Camden in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so when I was looking for a new hobby about 15 years ago, I decided to start volunteering at CAMRA beer festivals, got involved with that, and started to see areas where I was having a reasonably good time. It wasn't consistent, but with very, very simple changes, it could get better. And I started to talk about that. And that led to me running for national executive 3 years ago and making it onto the national exec. And then when I had an opportunity to kind of have a bit of a rehash of what my career was going to be, I was like, actually, I just love this industry, and I want to be able to give this industry what I was giving to the NHS at the end when I was like looking after big numbers of staff and their experience with their workplace.
Fantastic. It's so wonderful to speak to someone else who indeed just wants to drive passion into the industry and help it grow however they can. And today, that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the rising trends and why so many people, and we've talked about it, including yourself, are choosing a tap room over a pub. Let's start with that. Why is that? Why do you think that's happening these days?
I mean, when you asked me that question first, I was like, I thought it was a simple, because they're just a little bit bigger. And then I kind of delved in a bit more, and I was thinking, actually, no, I was looking at my birthdays, and my post-COVID birthdays have all been in tap rooms. And I think people are choosing them because then when you unpick some of the history of the pub and what's happened, and you look around tap rooms, you do see a different crowd. And I like that. And I think, so I think people are choosing it because they want to feel closer to the brewery and the people making the drinks. I think it's easier to align yourself with an identity, whether it's the beer, whereas the pub is a mixture of different identities. So you're able to kind of nail your colours to a mast for a couple of hours. And I think it grows from there.
Yeah, I get that, actually, kind of almost like the streamlining. It's the arrowhead of like, this is what this place is all about, versus you have to be a little bit of something for everyone in a pub environment. But what about, I suppose, maybe more pubs to me are very old versus when you look at tap rooms, very new school. Like from a kind of a accessibility side of things, do you think there are massive differences between the two?
Yeah, and I think it comes actually about from that shared usage that you'd find in a traditional tap room. There are some that aren't like this, not everything, and not all pubs are the opposite. But I think when you're looking at what you need and the function of a brewery, that actually lends itself to a slightly easier experience for people who might not be able to access a traditional a couple of 100-year-old pub on a typical high street. It's things like you are having to move things around, and if you're doing that, you need a good floor. So if you are supported by a wheelchair, or if you are using walking aids, it's a fatter surface. It's a smoother way. The tables can be arranged in such a way that the flow is better, and you're not trying to get around nooks and crannies and bars in the middle. And it's around that kind of being able to kind of step back and go, how, and if you've got different types of people, and you can actually rearrange the furniture to be conducive to lots of smaller groups or one large group that then has circulation space around it. There's a flexibility that I think also lends itself to the humans in the space having a slightly more comfortable experience.
But I can see that. Yeah, it's far more flexible when you think about the traditional pub where it's almost locked in place and it's very rigid, isn't it? But what about maybe the positives that we could take from the pub environment into a tap room environment? What do you think maybe tap rooms could double down on a little bit more and be inspired by?
Heating.
Yeah, good shout.
The tap room is never going to replace the pub, particularly in the winter and particularly in the evenings. So yeah, it's harder to control the ambient temperature in a tap room than it is in a pub. Weather, a lot of the time, the tap room is a hybrid inside-outside space. The pub can be cozier and give you a bit more shelter, but also that I think the feeling of community can be adopted. So you can look at how pubs do actually put their arms around the people who want to come in, and that's what they've done really well for a very, very long time. And tap rooms, I think, would be foolish to kind of think that they could ignore that and go about it a completely different way. It is still hospitality. You still have to be hospitable. And that's what the pub has probably given the world a lot more than anything else, is that kind of looking after people's needs. And the tap room, I think, has to keep hold of that when they're looking at how they create that space for people.
So when tap rooms are created, normally, well, you've got the brewery first and tap room might be a secondary thought, and not all the time, of course, they are thought in, side by side. But for those brewery owners who are going, yep, a tap room is the next logical step, this is where we need to move into because we know there's a benefit from it. What do they need to be like thinking about to make this a really inclusive space and, borrow from pubs and other tap rooms?
So I think it starts with flow. So when people come in, can they clearly see where the bar is? Can they clearly see where the toilets are? Can they clearly see what products are available? And can they tell which tap room they're in? Because I know I've lead brewery tours, and I made a joke once with a friend that I could just walk into their brewery without ever having seen it and just do a tour. And I won that bet because breweries are all very similar, the way the equipment is. So if you're going to invite people into your space, you need them to know it's your space. And some of that is branding, like the physical and visible branding, but some of that also is around quirks and kind of fun little eye line triggers of, oh, I know where I am if you just dump me in the middle of the tap room. Can I tell you which brewery I'm in? And that way you can foster that community that then will become your regulars, because people are regulars at tap rooms the same way they are at pubs.
Mm.
And they're the people who keep the lights on, and the big groups are the ones that kind of top it up. But if you have a good core group of customers who get it, they need to hook into what you're providing.
Mm. So I never thought about, when you say about those kind of like little bits that make you go, yeah, I'm in this tap room from this brewery, because I completely get the idea of layout and accessibility and signage, because those are what you'd hope they're things that have to be considered when you're building an environment like that. But then the extra step to go, yes, but this is your tap room, beyond a pretty logo or a poster. Yeah, like you say, there's kind of almost like Easter eggs that you can like litter around the place.
Because anyone can buy a truckload of used Oktoberfest furniture and dump it where you make the beer. That's a tap room. But is it the tap room that people then go, I can remember certain tap rooms that I walked in and just went, wow, and I hadn't even heard of the brewery. I just happened to be in the area and walked in and was like, yeah. And never had the beer before, never seen it, but went into that tap room and instantly felt like I got them.
Mm.
And that actually won Tap Room of the Year this year at SEBA. So at Stroud Brewery, we found it. We were on the Cotswolds. We found it on Google. It was like, oh yeah, look at me, I'm in a brewery. It's my thing I always put up on Instagram whenever I'm out and about. And walked in and say, didn't know the brewery really, but walked in and was just like, yeah, I get you as a brand, and I even know what the beer's going to be like just from the vibe in this tap room.
Love that. I suppose the other element that we haven't touched on beyond layout and visual is those people kind of behind the bar, the people like serving the beers and talking you through it. Because when I think about the pub environment, a lot of the time, well, hopefully you get the friendly landlord, who welcomes you in, a little bit about everything. What about the tap room kind of service and staff there? What should they be thinking about, considering, and how can they amplify this experience?
I think it's an I don't want to say undervalued, but I think it's an under-celebrated role. And I think there are some breweries that do it really well when getting their taproom managers in to keep that experience going and continue that vibe. And actually, looking at the industry, it's about the only area where women are overrepresented compared to men. It is in the retail, and a lot of the retail side in independent breweries is a tap room. So it's a really good way of showing diversity in your and inclusivity in your staff. It's also a way of talent spotting. If somebody then wants to go into the brewing side, if you're going to go to somebody in the tap room before a random CV lands in your inbox. But the staff, it is about understanding the beer and being able to talk about the beer, because if you've got big groups coming into a tap room, not everyone is going to be a beer drinker. Mm-hmm. And so their communication, either on making people still feel welcome, still feel valued, but rather than buy in a load of other drinks from other providers, have confidence in the products that you're serving and you're making, but work with your taproom staff to communicate with the customers and maybe help them find a beer that they like and bring them into this brilliant world. So it's huge opportunities if you work properly with your staff.
I suppose that goes back to what you're talking about. You're going to have your regulars. You're going to have those people who want to keep coming back. And it is probably more so that relationship with people that they have beyond, it's a good liquid that will keep them coming back. I personally remember one tap room experience, and I was given the cold shoulder ultimately by someone serving my pint when I was trying to ask questions about it. And I was like getting blood out of the stone. I was like, not really feeling like I'm going to come back here again. So lesson to be learned.
And that you might then negatively associate with that beer. So when you see it in a pub, you might actually have a callback to that experience.
Mm. Yeah, so it goes beyond the tap room, doesn't it? It's like it's then anchored in the liquid.
Yeah.
Ooh, never even thought about that. So a minute ago, we were talking about like diversity within the workplace and the tap room, and it being a really good entry point to bring people through, which makes a lot of sense. But even that sense of diversity must be easier to achieve in a tap room than potentially a pub that has been built and locked in to one gnarly, twisted building crammed between two massive behemoths of a building. So things like degendered bathrooms, right, and kind of like just even ground floor settings, like how important is that in a tap room environment versus what might not be possible in a pub?
I think it goes beyond even physical disability, and I think because I listened to a podcast recently with David Jesudasan and talking about Desi pubs and how they're an inclusive space, and it reminded me that in my lifetime it was still legal to refuse service to a woman at a bar. So, I mean, I know I was precocious, but I was 3 years old when that was taken out. So I could never have been refused service for that. I could have been refused service for being 3 years old, which is completely fine. But my mother could have been refused service at a bar. And it was in 1982 that the High Court overturned that piece of legislation. And so those buildings that I'm going into and buying drinks in my lifetime, I could have been excluded from. And so if you roll that forward and you think, and then I was chatting with people about this yesterday and found out that there was a kind of town-wide exclusion of lesbians in Hackney in like the late 80s. And that was legal. And hearing about people of colour, like all of these buildings have been places where they have been explicitly excluded from. And okay, the people in there, the pub can be so welcoming, but buildings can hold memories and buildings can represent how things used to be. And you go in some places and you see the saloon bar and the lounge bar, and I know in sometimes I would not have been allowed in some of those places, and the callbacks are there saying, oh, it's beautiful. I mean, it's historic. It's lovely. I'm so glad they're still there and preserved, almost to remind us that we've moved forward. But there are these aspects of this industry that have not been as welcoming to a lot of communities up until the last decade or so, in some cases. And I think then tap rooms have given like that clean slate to kind of go, and they often don't have doors. And so you don't have to go through that physical kind of, I'm opening this door, what is going to greet me? You can stand back and see and look and assess. And if you go to a pub and you open that door, is it going to go silent and everyone going to look at you?
Yeah, you're not from round here, look, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think those things, I don't think anyone's really saying, oh, I'm not going to go to the pub because, but I wonder if the clean slate of tap rooms has meant that people identify that somewhere they could go.
Because I remember you saying, and this is like a completely unintentional layout thing in pubs, but the idea of like just seeing what beer is available in a pub versus a tap room is quite a telltale sign of the evolution of how places have become more welcoming and inclusive. There's going to be a lot of people who haven't heard you talk about this. Could you take a couple of minutes to expand on it, please?
Yeah, so it starts from the fact that I'm a cask lover. That's what I will pick. If it's available, if it's good, if I'm in the right place, I will want cask. And I will walk up to the bar and I want to know what casks are on. But there's bar stools at the bar. And there's people sitting on those bar stools in front of the pumps. And there's no other kind of display going, oh, here's the beer that's on. So the only way I can see what's there is by looking at pump clips. And I've got to lean forward. And neither of us are consenting to this interaction in advance. But I can do that, but I just, because I want the cask more than but I don't know if everyone would do that. And what I've seen in tap rooms is when they put the big boards up above the bar, and so you can stand back, even just sitting there with your drink, you can plan your next drink, and you can work out what you want, what your tasters you might like. It'll move things quicker. But I really think this kind of not having to get so intimate at the bar, even with friends, but with complete strangers, is a physical barrier, and it's something that really saddens me, because I think it does stop people from like even trying cask or even seeing something that a name of a beer that they'd find curious. And I think it then kind of, because even peg the fonts are a little bit higher so you can see them, and that to me, as I've overcome it because that's a choice I've made to overcome it. But do I want to make that choice? I'd rather not. So, but the way the pubs are, because you've got the glassware and it's all quite closed in quite often. But in the tap room, you've got that extra height, so you can have the board up and you can have a look, and you can see, and if you haven't got screens in the pub, which help, but I think that's one of the things that when I say it, people just go, "Oh."
Well, it's doing a disservice to the variety of beer in there as well, because like you say, you're going to have a lot of people who visit the pub and go, oh, I don't want to push forward, I don't want to have to crick my neck to take a look, so I'm just going to go with something which I assume I know they have, and it kind of limits the choices that way. So it's a really fascinating point. But what I wonder is, obviously these are kind of what I would assume are unintentional barriers that have happened in the pub environment, and of course it must be very costly to rectify those situations in a pub. Or do you think something like, where COVID came in, could that have been seen as a reset opportunity for a lot of these environments to do something different?
Yeah, you didn't have to put the stalls back after COVID. It's a choice. They are movable objects. They're giving, they're saying that there's a status to people who are already there, and they can be taken away. And okay, customers might get grumpy, but I find most people are reasonable. And if you say to them, we're doing this because actually we want more people to see the cask, we want people to be able to approach the bar more easily, we want to create better flow around the building because they might be creating a bottleneck. It's really hard if somebody's even shorter, not even using a wheelchair, but to even be seen from the bar, there's people in the way. And those are things that if you stand back and go, this is the first time I'm walking into this pub, is it welcoming, not about, you're right mate, how are you doing, but does somebody feel that when they walk into that pub they are going to be comfortable before we even get to have fun? Are they going to have their basic comfort and their basic human needs met? And it's really hard to have fun if you haven't been able to move around, see the bar, see the beers, and then maybe somebody's made a remark to you because you've nudged them, and all of those things kind of build up, when actually, for the sake of 4 seats, because they're not, most of the time they're not even like a lot, for the sake of those 4 seats, how many other people are you making feel less engaged?
I'm just going back to the tap room, and I'm just thinking, if I were to create a tap room, or any brewery owner, I'm not a brewery owner, I can't put myself in the same boat. You know what I mean? Shut up, Tim. Carry on. Yes, Tim. If you're building out a tap room, you might build it out based on your kind of mindset and what you believe to be right and what is acceptable to you. So, for me, I'd never even considered like the accessibility of the hand pull clips and things, because I'm a taller guy, so I can see over the top of a lot of people. Would you recommend, or are there things that owners and people creating tap rooms need to kind of like think through the process and kind of consider other perspectives? Like how would they go about that?
Well, this is where there are people out there who can help them. I mean, there there are charities, so people like Accessible, there's Ask for Clive, there's like Women on Tap. There's a lot of places that you can go and get this kind of information. The other thing is, be humble and ask. And one of the ones that I found out about when I was doing the panel at CBER is one brewery that put a lowered part of the counter, because they were building the counter from scratch, and they made a lowered part of the counter, which meant if somebody was using a wheelchair, they could approach that part of the bar, be seen, and be able to receive their drink at a comfortable height for them.
Nice.
And you just look at it and go, well, that makes sense. But it's obvious that somebody had that thought or seen it somewhere else, so looked around, or even had to use a wheelchair temporarily and had a very different experience in the world, or got a friend who was able to tell them. And it is just about being humble. Ask the question and then listen to the answer. And go out there and just even use your mailing list and go out and say, yeah, we're going to do some stuff in the tap room. How do we make it even better?
I think it's a massive takeaway, and it goes for a lot to help a brewery succeed in many aspects, not just a tap room layout, but actually listening to your audience and your drinkers and what they're looking for and what they want. Having that wider perspective can be so powerful, even from a brand building side of things. Like what I look at, I completely agree. What I wonder, right, is of course the rise in micropubs these days, over the traditional pub. I get the financial benefits of, starting a micropub versus taking on a pub. But from what I've seen, they probably lean more towards the pub aesthetic and layout than potentially inspired by the taproom stuff. Is there any rationale behind that, do you think?
Well, I think because a micropub is in that kind of commercial space, retail space, whereas the tap room's in an industrial space. And the retail space is probably a closer family member to the pub in that respect, because a lot of micro pubs, they tend to come about where a high street shop is vacated. And rather than have to be on the corner, because pubs used to have to be on the corner so the dray could get in, that's why if a pub's been around for a long time, because it tends to be on the corner of a block. The ones that are in the middle of the block tend to be later, like post horse drawn dray. And then ones that are even later, like the micropub, and a lot of that has come about as well with kind of local authorities wanting to re-energize and reinvigorate the high street. So they've created the opportunity to switch the permissions, so the licensing, that they can get that license. So I think it's always going to be closer to a pub because it's going to have a door and it's going to be part of a wider high street. The non-traditional part of it is the fact that the cellar's probably out the back in a cold room rather than under the floor. So I think that from the consumer perspective, it's not that much different to a pub. I think the difference comes a lot more in the kind of the staff side and the logistics side of how it's set up. But that does give the opportunity, because you're building the counter, you're not using an old bar. It doesn't have to be immediately over the cellar, so you can have the shortest run possible, so you're not wasting beer in long lines. So you've got that flexibility there, which means you can think a bit more people first, rather than we've got this fixed infrastructure that we then have to build around.
Because I suppose I'm thinking about even the term micropub versus a tap room, or or bottle shops and things. No, of course there are specific definitions within each of those, but are people more actively looking for, the general public are more actively looking for something with the word pub in versus a tap room or something like that, just because it's ingrained in them? Or is there a shift where it's more any of them will do the job?
That's a good question. I think the people who go to the tap room either are more engaged with the beer industry as as identifying as a fan of beer, so the kind of person who will put the beer in Untapped or follow a brewery on Instagram. Obviously that's not a complete rule. Like if you look around some of the conglomerations of tap rooms, so the sadly gradually decimating Black Horse Mile, you'd see a lot of people around there who might not follow those breweries on Instagram, who might not identify as craft beer enthusiasts, but they're there because the space works for them. It's local, it's not a pub, so they might not even consider themselves big drinkers, but it's a space that they can meet their friends, and it's a little bit more relaxed. With micro pubs, I think they just very similar to pubs, and it's an almost routine that when I was awards director for CAMRA, somebody would have the brilliant idea to email me like, why don't we have a micro pub of the year category? I said, because when we boil it down and try to write the definition of a micro pub, we just end up back at a pub. And then they said, what about tap rooms? It's like, well, those that have casks, so therefore would be eligible for pub of the year, they're pubs. What about brew pubs? I was like, clues in the name. Every time we came back to, it's a pub. Let's not try and do these artificial definitions and then make our volunteers to work harder to tick the boxes and do the scoring. We can be really open in like the Good Beer Guide about what's happening there, but I think what's going to pull somebody in is it's an environment they feel that they're going to be welcome in. And pubs, tap rooms, micro pubs, bottle shops, can shops, brew pubs, all of those things at the end of the day, all they need to do is sell good beer and make people feel welcome, and they'll succeed on their terms without trying to kind of force themselves into categories to then try and get a certificate.
And you obviously touched on the Pub of the Year award side of things, and there, I should imagine there's going to be people listening going, oh, we serve cast, so there's a potential we could be considered for Pub of the Year. Realistically, like what do they need to be thinking about? What areas do they need to deliver on? Obviously, you said the very high level of good liquid, people feel welcome, but how is that identified? How could they break that down and go, actually, we could be considered for this?
So every CAMRA branch is invited to submit their pubs of the year. They're given a bit of freedom as well. So if a pub is brilliant but might not win their pub of the year, they can split it out. They can give summer pub of the year, winter pub of the year. Norwich and District has a Norwich pub of the year and a District pub of the year, which is outside of the city. Then they put forward their pub of the year, and anyone can be a CAMRA member, so you can work in a pub, run a pub, you can be part of that process. We have checks and balances to make sure that people can't just nominate themselves all the time, just before anyone thinks that will happen. And then they're judged regionally, and then they're judged kind of into regional groups, and then the final four. And the categories, so the two ones that get like the double points are the quality of the beer, not selection, the quality. So if you have 2 or 3 handfuls that are phenomenal, you are more likely to score highly than if you've got 7 or 8 that are a bit ropey because you haven't got the throughput. Welcome, community engagement, we look at that. We don't look at accessibility per se, because I wouldn't have the experience to make an assessment, and I wouldn't expect the people doing the judging, but you can tell if they're going to help somebody out if they need it, and the person would feel comfortable asking for help. And then and it's just about that environment, and they're judged and the scores are put together, and then the final 4 each year, they're never judged same person 2 years in a row. And there's a lot of work goes into making sure there's always somebody from the younger end. we always try and get somebody around 30. We say under 30, but around 30 to have a look, because I've hidden in plain sight judging, and as does my partner, because we do not look like CAMRA members. And but that way we can, because when we are putting our name to pub of the year, anyone's going to walk in, and we need to know that anyone is going to feel comfortable there.
And when you talk about like knowing the environment's welcoming and community, I think you said the word community. I hear a lot of times where that word community is used, and to me a lot of the time it's lost a lot of essence or weight to the phrase. Like, how do you measure what community is and welcoming environment? Is it just a large amount of people in a space, or does it go beyond that?
It's got to be a bit more purposeful. So examples are, do they provide space for the local football teams to have a drink afterwards? I was in a pub and I saw they got the shirt that they sponsor a local LGBT football team. And I looked at that and immediately I'm like, I get where you're coming from. Like, it's working with the people and creating a space where people can use the pub for what it is. And that's what we did see in COVID, that pubs did brilliantly, is they became community hubs. They became post offices. They became food banks. They became a place that people who are lonely can go and talk to people. They become warm spaces. When the energy crisis hit and people were really short of money, pubs would welcome people in and not expect them to pay rent for their seat by buying lots of stuff. They'd make them feel welcome if it was the only place they could get warm, because they couldn't afford to be warm at home. And that's what community is in pubs. It's becoming a resource for the people who live around you, that they identify you as more than somewhere you go and get drunk, but it's somewhere it's raining and you can't cycle anymore, and they'll let you come in with your bike and they'll like dry you off. It's a safe place to go when you are maybe vulnerable. And I will give a shout out for this. I saw a brilliant thing in a Wetherspoons which said, if you're waiting for your bus, wait here. And they welcomed people to wait for their bus inside the pub because it was dry, it was warm, and it was safe. And that was explicitly advertised in the ladies' toilets. And it was all the things they were doing to support you as a woman in that space. I felt looked out for and looked after. And I wasn't from that place, but I was like, but the fact that they offered it explicitly, it was, no, we're okay with that. Use us. Don't feel embarrassed. Don't feel uncomfortable. We'd rather you were in here than out there.
Yeah, just making it really clear, really obvious that they're thinking about, well, just everyone in general. And taking it back to the taproom conversation, naturally, that's not exclusive to pubs. Everyone can bring that sentiment into their taproom, correct? So what I'm thinking is, we talked about taprooms, fresh slate, opportunity to do things well, more space, more accessibility based on where they are and how they're built and things like that. But they cannot be like the epitome of what the most inclusive place can be. I'm sure there's still work to be done for a lot of tap rooms. So where do you see this going? Like, what would you love to see looked at even more and introduced into a tap room environment for people who are still trying to better themselves and improve their offering?
I think it is about giving people reasons to come, reasons to visit, because there's competition out there. And it's not about the shiniest thing, but it's about having a really good diverse range of food trucks. That's another area where tap rooms have flexibility. So if they don't have a kitchen, but people do want to eat, well, invite some different ethnicities, and there's a load of different food trucks around. And I mean, I've eaten food from all over the world in rural Norfolk at the Barsham tap room, because they're purposefully they're going out and they're bringing these different foods in, and that says to people from that community, oh look, we see you, like come along. I think there's things around actually health and well-being. So pubs do a good thing around the kind of like one of the previous pubs of the year, one of the things they were commended for was the like the art classes and the painting classes that the wreath making that they'd hold in the pub. But you can do something different in a tap room, and if any, I'm just going to straight to camera. If any breweries want to do this, hit me up. I would love to see them do like an assault course outside using casks and kegs as the equipment, because they've got more space. And I've seen people do yoga in tap rooms, and so that's about kind of doing something healthy and then engaging. Maybe not the running club where 50 people rock up at once, and then if you want to pay for a beer, you've got to queue up behind 50 people getting a free half. Think about how you do that, but actually combine it with other interests that people have.
I love that. I posted about this just the other day, and my aspect was everyone's scared about the rise of AI, and it's going to take our jobs, and it's going to steal all these things. But I was like, actually, if you have a tap room, or if you have a place where you'd have face-to-face human connection, they might be one of the very few protected places where you want a place that you can feel welcome, involved, experience things, because it's outside of the realms currently of what can be automated and done online. And so to create those things, I love the idea of the assault course. I'd hate to think of the cost of the insurance to cover something like that, but I think it could be epic. But there's so many things like...
As long as you do a risk assessment.
There you go. There you go. But Mash Gang did the Beyblade tournament not that long ago in Bristol, which is phenomenal. I've seen pubs do the Mario Kart tournaments, like just different things that pull people in, I think.
Yeah, and all like Elusive, all of the retro games, and
exactly all the 8-bit stuff.
And then Werewolf, the Ghost Train, like all of the things that make you know where you are, but also add some playfulness to it. Like, why did we stop playing after allegedly becoming adults?
I think you're completely right, and that almost takes us back full circle to that you know where you are when you're in an environment with those kind of Easter eggs. So Laura, I want to bring this conversation to a close, and it's the same question I ask everyone who joins me, or it would appear to be. You're sat in a tap room next to the brewery owner, but they've got to jump in a cab, and their cab's just around the corner, and you've just got a minute to kind of impart a piece of advice, or that kind of like, oh, don't forget, or look into this kind of thing. With that minute, what would you be suggesting to a tap room owner about, you know, their tap room and what they need to be thinking about to really future-proof it moving forward?
Give people a reason to engage afterwards, whether that's coming back or a way to purchase things. So if you're selling takeouts and somebody's got a load of stuff with them, show them the web shop, engage them with, we don't have all of our t-shirts in stock in size because it costs us a lot to sit on it, but if you want a t-shirt, you can do the drop ship and get it sent there, and find a way of continuing that relationship beyond the time that they're in the tap room by making them feel part of their community, and you're now a key part of that community, even if it's your first visit.
Love it. That's great. So taking the offline and continuing it, you know, to that beautiful. Okay, this has been brilliant, Laura. If people want to read more of your work or see you speak or get in touch, where are the best places for them to find you?
So my LinkedIn is Laura Emson. It'll be on Tim's afterwards. On Instagram, I am the girl with the hop tattoo. Unfortunately, I will caveat this with, as I said earlier, I was born in 1979. I am not a digital native. I could be a lot better at posting on areas. Or they can get in touch with me on hop.tattoo.consulting@gmail.com. Particularly if you're in London and you like the idea of a brewery assault course. But in the slightly more serious side of things, I'm going to encourage you to join CAMRA, and if you say CAMRA doesn't have people who look like you in CAMRA, then the way you change that is by joining CAMRA and having somebody then who looks like you as a member. And I really hope you have a positive experience, but if you don't, you can always get in touch with me about that. But also Women on Tap, we are pushing really hard to have 50% representation of women across the industry in all aspects of the industry. And we need 1,000 change makers to give us the funding to support programs of work like that. So find us on Women on Tap. And if anything around like wanting me to talk at events or even come in and work with you on staff experience and inclusivity, then just use my email and get in touch.
Amazing. So many great opportunities to get involved and get in touch, Laura. Thank you once again so much. Everyone who's been listening, who's given us 45 minutes of your well-earned time, we truly appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking the time. If you liked what you heard here, please do search for Branding for Breweries on your favorite podcast platform. You can even go to thebrandweaver.co.uk/branding for breweries and get links straight there. Beyond that, everyone, stay awesome. You rock.